This is Joe Tucker, and welcome to our podcast. I'm President of the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, and this is the Rule of Law. The Academy speaks. Today, once again, I'm honored to have another good friend on from the Academy, Craig Peters, from out of San Francisco, talking to us. Craig gave an inspiring dean's address, and I wanted to get him on this podcast as soon as possible. In this time period when people are concerned about what's going on in the world and what's going on around us, the politics and different things that are going on, Craig's speech was a unique speech. He talked about optimism. Craig, why did you choose optimism for your dean's address?
It was interesting when as you well know, Joe, because you gave an amazing dean's address as well on racism and the death penalty in America. You get that job roughly a year before you give your address. And so you've got a lot of time to think about it, perseverate over it, and fret and worry and sweat. And so when that happened for me, it was March of 2024. And there was this election that was happening, maybe you recall.
I heard about it.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you had Trump and then Biden and then eventually had Kamala. And so we were clearly in a politically fraught time with lots of challenges to democracy, the rule of law, the things that we care about as citizens, and perhaps even more so because of our role as lawyers and advocates. And I wanted to position the address in a way that it wasn't going to matter who won or who lost in the election in November. The message might still resonate. And so that's kind of how I initially got to talking about democracy. Democracy depends on us. We need to be optimistic
Oh, well,
because,
that's interesting because listening to the address, it it would appear because people were, many people have been so upset about Trump's election. Of course, most of the voters elected Trump. But for the audience you were speaking to, it seemed to be lots of people were upset about Trump's election. So I thought you had done your address or you had written your address post-election.
yeah, and most of it had been done, certainly most of the filming that I had done had all happened prior to November. And I will admit that while the goal was to have an address that hopefully would resonate regardless of who won, it was a little bit of a gut punch and a reality check for me that while in my head and consciously I was talking about, well, it won't really matter who's elected. This hopefully will be a speech that will resonate. It did cause me after the election to rethink it all. And is this really still the right path to go down? And I was um, encouraged by my collaborator, Angel Granados, who is the amazing video journalist and professor at UCLA for cinematography that was helping me not just with the video, but he was also kind of a sounding board for me about the ideas and what the address should look like. And we both kind of came to the conclusion, and actually even more so, is this the right topic? But the challenge is it gonna land with your audience, right? At the end of the day, as trial lawyers, we know it doesn't matter how great you think the messaging is, if it doesn't resonate with your audience, if it doesn't land with the audience, it's kind of all for naught.
The idea that you would talk about optimism in what we think are these fraught times. And that was just really good. One theme that you did talk about, you just touched upon it a second in your speech. You said democracy depends on us. Why don't you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I was trying to take the context of the political space that we were in at the time, whether it was March of 2024 or now, and say, well, how are we here? Why are we here? What got us here? And this idea that people that don't, oftentimes share views that I have, that are, I think would consider themselves mega, it got me thinking, well, what is the time in America that they want to go back to? And without dismissing it out of hand that there never was a better time, I really struggled to try to find some piece of our past history that maybe was better than it is now. which is what led me to in the speech talking about my grandmother and these, she went through the Depression, she went through World War II, both of which were these events that I think brought people from disparate backgrounds and histories together because of this shared experience of being thrown into poverty from the Depression or losing loved ones to World War II. Those were fleeting. Those, that didn't last. It wasn't a resilient kind of coming together, but it was a moment. And so I was thinking, well, how do we recreate that? How do we recreate that sense of community where people feel really invested, which is really the engine that makes democracy works. Democracy works because people feel like they're doing better because of the connections they have with other people through this democratic process. And we've lost that a little bit. And so I was trying to find ways to connect us to maybe those fleeting moments in the past to what we can do now, and using, people, as I mentioned in my address, I don't know that I have a whole lot to offer. I'm a probably average intelligence guy
You're
with
being
average
you're being
skills,
over you're being
but
overly modest, Craig. We
well,
know
but
how
my
brilliant you are.
but my if I have a superpower, my superpower is that I've been incredibly fortunate to be surrounded by and mentored by and exposed to people who are really incredible and
Yeah.
have an optimism when they shouldn't. In particular, although it's kind of interesting because I didn't realize it until after the address was over, um, so it wasn't intentional. But the three people I picked, none of them actually look like me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit first about Jamie Spar and continue on to talk to us about, Karen and Jeff.
So Janie was the associate minister at the Presbyterian church that we went to. My mom was the church secretary, and both my parents were youth advisors for both the senior high youth and the junior high youth. This is before my brother and I were old enough to be in those groups. Janie, as the associate minister, was in charge of both of those youth groups, and she and her husband Jim had two sons that were the same age as my brother and I. And so our family spent a ton of time together. I mean, every day after school, we were there at, all four of kids were at Janie's house or they were at our house. We'd go on these youth group retreats together, the weekly meetings that they would have for both the junior high and senior high. Typically, my brother and I would be there, as would be Chet and Jim. So she had made this incredibly successful youth group that went from maybe 10 people, a dozen people a week, to hundreds, literally hundreds of kids from all different faith or no faith at all would come to these things. And kind of at the height of all of this, Janie came out as gay, and she came before it became part of the public news. It actually made the front page of the local newspaper. Before all that happened, she'd come to our house. She and Jim, her husband, had come together to tell my brother and I that she was gay and what that meant. It didn't mean she loved Jim less. It was just a part of her that had been suppressed, and that she really needed to be honest with herself and with others to be the full person that she could be. And it wasn't fair to anybody else for her to pretend otherwise. Um, that all made a ton of sense to me. I didn't understand when the stuff hit the newspaper, and
Now, what year was this about, Craig, that she came out and announced that she was gay?
this would have been in like 1978ish, maybe 77, 78, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so being gay was it wasn't like it is now, where it's at least in some circles is fine, right? It's like having brown hair, right? It's just the thing you are. It's not. Then it was a big deal, and it was a big deal to the community, um, in ways that were really, distressing. I think for me as a kid, it was really distressing. Like, I had seen Janie and continued to see Janie in one way. Nothing had changed, and yet somehow people's attitudes had changed, but she was still doing the same thing she'd been doing before that everybody loved.
Well, what did
So
the church do when she announced that she was gay?
yeah, so she had to resign her job, and then eventually she was able to get a job in San Francisco, at MCC, which is a church in the Castro, where she was welcomed with open arms. She got the job there and really kind of blossomed where she could have both her sexuality and her spirituality both coexist in peace. And
Hmm.
then eventually got this amazing offer to be the pastor at a church in Rochester, New York, which was then blocked by the Presbyterian Church writ large. And so the Rochester Church was so committed to Janie and to breaking down these stereotypes and barriers to people who were gay from serving in the church. They created a nonprofit, hired her as the head of the nonprofit, which was called That All May Freely Serve, and then sent her around the country to go preach in these deeply red conservative places where Janie could person the issue. So before there was ever a Brian Stevenson talking about getting proximate, there was a Janie Spar talking about personing the issue, which is essentially the same concept, which is you and I have a harder time disliking each other for surface material things if we actually have to interact with each other, because we will find the similarities that we share with one another, which then creates an opportunity to bridge those gaps on the differences. And that was Janie's whole work, and here we are in 2025. Gay, lesbian, transsexual, bisexual folks can be ministers in the Presbyterian Church, are welcome to serve, are asked to come serve, to be deacons, to be elders. Um,
And we call people like Jamie trailblazers, true trailblazers who've cut down the forest, who have carved a path through the woods. And it's not easy. And I'm glad she's inspired you. Can you tell us a little bit about Karen?
yeah, so Karen, many years later became a lawyer and started working at the public defender's office, eventually in San Francisco. And Karen Che is this amazing person who had worked in refugee camps after college and felt that there was really something that needed to be done to help people in these criminal justice systems that weren't just at all. They were using torture to extract confessions because that was an easy way to get
Hold
conviction.
for what refugee camps did she work in? What?
Yeah, sorry. So she was in Cambodia, and I think she also worked in Laos and Vietnam. Um, and just saw the kind of the horrors of a system that didn't have advocates or representation for these people who'd been accused of crimes. So she wanted to do something more than what she was doing about that problem. Thought law school was the way to go, because then she'd at least have the legal skills. So she went to law school. The logical thing in her mind to do was go be a public defender. That's where you learn those skills. That's what she did. And by serendipity, 3 years after becoming a public defender, had a flyer on her desk asking for somebody to go and help create a criminal justice system in Cambodia, the very place that she'd been. Um, and so she decided she'd go. And so there were three of them, three lawyers from the US who went to try to help create a justice system in Cambodia that, um, they had there was no map of how to do this. There was no road plan. There was no user's manual. There's nothing. It was just like, go create a system, right? And by the way, you have no resources. You have nothing. Um, and she was pretty successful at it. And for whatever reason, she can't quite put her finger on it. While she was doing that work, about 4 years in, she felt called to go to the seminary. She had been admitted to the Harvard Seminary program right around the same time she'd gone to law school and had deferred going to the seminary. So the story I love about Karen is she graduates from seminary at Harvard, and they have each of the graduates write a one-page plan of what they would like to accomplish in the world with their degree in ministry. And Karen decides that her plan is she's going to end torture around the world. I mean,
That's that's a
who does
lot.
that, right? Like, who does that? Who's like, yeah, that's my plan. Sure, I got all the skills I need now. I've got a law degree, I got a divinity degree. I'll go and torture. And by God, she went and started doing it. Right? She created this organization called International Bridges to Justice. She started building these programs through these countries that didn't really have robust systems. Some had systems, but they needed help and advancement. And that's how I got involved. Was she asked me to come. At the time, I was the director of training for the public defender's office in San Francisco, and she asked me to come to India, to New Delhi, to create a training program for their equivalent of public defenders. And there were hundreds and hundreds of these attorneys there, in a system that I didn't really know. And, Karen, in her kind of undaunted way, was like, when I'm sort of saying, like, well, there's this problem, I don't know about this, I don't know about that. She's like, Craig, just talk to him about how to tell a story, and talk to him about how to connect with your client so that you can be the best advocate possible. And then we'll do some basic training stuff around that. And it was kind of like, okay, all right, I can do that. I still don't know all the rules, but sure, we'll do that. And it was a huge learning experience for me. I mean, it was one of the most gratifying trainings I think I've ever been a part of. Um, just because of the cross-cultural connection, because it forces your brain to think in a new way, right? Just because somebody's system's different doesn't mean it's worse. In some ways, maybe it's better. Um, and so, anyhow, it was so Karen. That's her work. She continues to do that to this day. China, Thailand. I mean, she's been numerous different countries in Africa. She's a real inspiration that
And
somebody would have.
we owe a lot to her. And you told us about two of the stars that have been your North Stars. Let's talk about the third, Jeff. And Jeff sounds like the kind of guy I wish I had met, who I know I would have loved to have met and to have worked with. Tell us a little bit about Jeff.
Yeah, Joe, you would have loved Jeff. He would have loved you. Yeah, Jeff was kind of a Renaissance man. He's not only devoted to the practice of law and really helping those who needed help the most, the indigent, the people that public defenders represent, but also changing perceptions. And that was one of the things that I don't think I appreciated quite as much when I was in the office as I do once I left and I sort of reflected back. Jeff realized that you can't just change the content, that is, provide better representation for indigent folks. So, in fact, the representation is so good, it's better than what you'd get if you went out and paid for a private criminal defense attorney. That's not enough. You have to go back to those communities where your clients come from, and you need to talk to them about what you're doing and why our representation is so good so that the word spreads. The public perception is an important component, but married together with real content change, right? Like, it's not just smoke and mirrors, it's real content change. And that's what Jeff was just such a master at. He loved people, he respected everybody,
Now,
in a
just to
way that.
step back, Jeff, excuse me, Jeff was the public defender for San Francisco.
Sorry, skipped over that part.
Yes.
Yes, he
Yes.
was the public defender. And Jeff, so he had come up through the ranks in the public defender's office. There's an amazing story we don't have time for today about how he ultimately became the elected public defender despite the political machinery in San Francisco conspiring against him. But he was just such an astute people person. Um, he won the election. He won it handily, and his 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 secret sauce was that he was elected. And most public defenders in the United States, in fact, all the public defenders in the United States, are appointed typically by either a board of supervisors or a mayor or a governor. And so they're beholden to those people that allocate the funds to them to sort of go along to get along in many cases. Not always. I mean, there's plenty that fight hard for the funds that their offices need. But the entire state of Florida, oddly enough, and San Francisco are the only two places in the entire country where the public defender is actually elected. And that gives them a measure of autonomy, where they don't have to do what the supervisors say for fear of getting fired by the board of supervisors because they're their boss. In this
Yeah,
case,
he
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 wasn't.
was clearly audacious, bold, downright flashy.
He was, yeah, because he wanted to project, again, the content mattered. and was that was number one, was content. You needed to be a top tier lawyer. You needed to have top tier trial skills. You needed to constantly flex that muscle. But at the same time, you also had to look the part. That had people's perception of us was going to be affected by what they saw. If we were wearing, ragged suits or ties that aren't properly tied or whatever it might be, that then deteriorates the perception, even if the content's good. So the two have to go together, and that was a big part of what Jeff was all about. And getting out into the community, being a real visible presence in the community to let them know that he was there for them. And Jeff was not one of these public defenders like many who, he sits up high and assigns cases out and, hopes that cases turn out well. He took cases himself. So even though he was in charge of administering the entire office, this huge public defender office, he always had a caseload himself. Now, it was a small caseload, but he thought it was important that he, as well as all of the other supervisors in the office, including me when I was director of training, that we all had to have an active caseload so that we were constantly in the court so that we could see what our colleagues were going through and what they were dealing with so that we could better react and help them.
Craig, you've talked to us about Jamie, you've talked to us about Karen, and you've talked to us about Jeff. How did these three people remain optimistic during these times?
I'm not sure how. I know that they did. I think they had something special inside of them. I mean, these are exceptional people. Um, and they had I think the thing to me that makes them so exceptional is they had every reason to take a different route that wasn't quite so hard, not so fraught with difficulty and challenges, but they chose this path. They had this like internal north star that this is the way things should be, and I'm just going to keep working at it. And it's almost like the working at it fueled the optimism, right? It became this kind of self-fulfilling thing that just kept propelling them forward to do more and more and more to solve the problems that they saw around them and try to make this world a better place. I don't know that we all have it, but I think that it is true that when we start to feel a purpose, optimism's easier to come by. And so if
That's a
our
good
purpose
thing.
is, yeah, if our purpose is just, look, I'm gonna call my elected officials every week, or I'm gonna meet in my community rooms with people who don't think like me and listen to them and hear them out to try to build that community, right? That there's things that all of us can do.
Small acts, as they begin to accumulate, become large acts and become movements. And oftentimes we look to politicians to do things for us. And I think we can do those things ourselves with small acts, because the small acts, when you have millions of people doing small acts, those become one big act. And whatever it is, whatever you may feel, if we believe in democracy and we continue to fight for democracy, of course it will prevail. But democracy can only prevail if we are here fighting for it.
Yep. My grandma said you got to show up, right? And sometimes that's enough, right? Like you don't have to don't go out to try to, solve all the world's problems. Go out to just be present as a starting point, right? And if that motivates you then to do more, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too.
Craig, let me conclude with this question. I need you to talk to the listeners and tell them why they should remain optimistic and what they can do to stay optimistic.
I look, I want to first caveat, right? It's hard. I think these are hard times to be optimistic. Um, but it's worth it. And it's worth it for a number of reasons. It's worth it because our country depends on it, our communities depend on it. Those people who are the most marginalized and disenfranchised, the people that are the least able to fight for themselves, they depend on us who do have the ability to protect them, the rule of law, the division of our three branches of government. And so optimism is kind of this fuel, I think, that allows us, if we, it's a mindset. And so if our mindset is we can do better, well, then we are more likely to do better. If it starts to feel overwhelming and we acquiesce to that feeling, then for sure things are not going to get better. And I would just point out that if you just look at what's happened in the last 2 weeks uh, with our nation, with people being active, right? Well, they're optimistic enough to go out, engage in protests, engage in demonstrations, to write their Congress people, to call their Congress people, to email their Congress people, right? It has made a change. Like you can start to feel that the tide is turning. It's not going to turn quickly. It's not going to happen all at once. It's going to happen incrementally. So we just have to also be patient. I think that's a part of optimism is patience, which quite frankly, I'm not particularly good at patience. But if we can maintain some patience that allows us to sustain our optimism through these times, we are going to come out on the other side. How do I know? Because I think if you look at history, it tells us that that's what's so, right? Rosa
Yeah.
Parks, the easy thing for Rosa Parks to do was to get up and go sit in a different seat, right? Like that was the easy thing to do. I mean, imagine a black woman at that time who's got no power whatsoever, has everything in the world to worry about, right? Just do the easy thing. You just need to get through this life, right? You don't
Yeah.
have enough wherewithal to make this stand. And yet she made the stand. And what happens? We now all recognize her as this icon. I think we actually don't fully appreciate what a significant stand it was at the time. And so people like that exist in our history, right? She's one of many, right? I mean, we could go on for hours about all of them. Well, those people still exist and they're all around us. One of them's right here interviewing me right now, right? Who's doing all he can to fight back. And look, God bless you, Joe, for having a podcast and for doing all you're doing for IATL, for the rule of law. You're getting out there and you're speaking out, and that's important. And the problem we have right now is that when we aren't feeling optimistic, when we're starting to feel a little blue, it's because people who aren't us
Yeah.
right now tend to get the megaphone. And so it creates this distortion where we think that that's the majority. It's not the majority. People who want the rule of law, they're the majority. We are part of that majority. And so that should be something that sustains us. There's people, good people all around us who believe in democracy, who want the rule of law. We're going to get through
Well,
this.
damn it, Craig. I want to thank you for firing folks up and for giving us optimism. This has been really good. I've been trying to get you on here because when you gave your dean's address, you fired me up that day. You fired up everyone there. And thanks for sharing these thoughts and your stories and these people who have inspired you and to letting us understand that democracy can work. If you've liked what you heard, subscribe. You can find this podcast on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. This has been The Rule of Law, The Academy Speaks, and I'm Joe Tucker, your host. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.